Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle descent into the past, a journey into a forgotten world where myth, power, and ritual dance together beneath the burning Egyptian sun. Tonight, I invite you to close your eyes, rest beneath the covers, and let the last hours of the day dissolve as we open the doors to an ancient realm, one rediscovered not through textbooks or Hollywood tales, but through whispers etched in stone and fragments of papyrus. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. Are we continents apart or merely divided by a few time zones, listening together as the stars emerge? If you find peace in quiet storytelling and thoughtful history, be sure to subscribe, because together, we're about to uncover something extraordinary. Our story takes us 3,000 years back in time, to an Egypt where pleasure and power were intertwined, where dance was not mere art but divine language, and where women could reshape the destiny of empires with a single movement. These were no ordinary dancers, they were priestesses, politicians, and power brokers, women whose names still echo faintly through history, though their true legacy has been long obscured. Before we begin, let me show you what lies ahead. We'll uncover how young girls were trained from childhood in sacred disciplines far beyond the art of dance. We'll step behind the walls of temples where the most intimate and powerful rituals were performed, ceremonies so secret that only the elite could ever witness them. And finally, we'll see how these women accumulated influence and wealth that rivaled the nobility itself, their network stretching from the Nile to the edges of the known world. For months, I've traced archaeological evidence, decoded forgotten hieroglyphs, and pieced together delicate fragments of papyrus that reveal a civilization where sacred sexuality and divine power were one and the same. These stories aren't about entertainment, they're about women who understood that their bodies were temples, their movements were prayers, and their grace was a force that could shift the balance of kingdoms. Let us begin where history itself trembled. The year is 1323 BCE. In his golden palace at Memphis, the boy king Tutankhamun lies dying, his body frail from malaria and the curses of royal inbreeding. The empire wavers on the edge of chaos. In dim corridors, nobles whisper of succession, priests argue over which god has been offended. And amid this storm stands a young woman, Anka Ceneamon, the teenage widow of the dying pharaoh. Anka Ceneamon was no ordinary widow. Trained from childhood in the sacred arts few dared even to name, she was about to perform a ritual that could decide the fate of Egypt itself. As she walks toward the temple of Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, and feminine power, her footsteps echo like omens. The temple doors close behind her with a sound like thunder. Inside, the air shimmers with the heat of countless oil lamps. The walls pulse with hieroglyphs depicting goddesses who danced the world into existence. Waiting within the inner sanctuary are the Ka, sacred dancers trained from infancy to embody the divine feminine. Each gesture they perform carries ancient meaning, each movement a word in the silent language of the soul. Tonight, they will teach Anka Ceneamon a dance long forbidden, a ritual so powerful it could legitimize her rule as queen in her own right. This is no performance. This is diplomacy, statecraft conducted through rhythm and motion. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a ruler but the living vessel of divine energy. That energy flowed through both masculine and feminine forces, the masculine, embodied by gods like Ra and Ammonius, radiant, ordered, blazing like the sun, and the feminine, represented by Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet, transformative, mysterious, capable of creation or destruction. As the drums begin their deep, hypnotic rhythm, Anka Ceneamon starts to move. Her body flows like water, serpentine and divine, as if Hathor herself inhabits her flesh. The other dancers form a sacred circle around her, their movements creating living geometry, a cosmic map. This is not choreography. It is magic, a technology of consciousness that the ancient Egyptians mastered long before modern minds dared imagine it possible. The tradition of sacred dance in Egypt stretches back more than 4,000 years. Archaeological discoveries at Hierakonpolis show painted scenes of women in ritual movement, not entertainers, but temple officials who wielded both spiritual and political authority. Even great queens like Hatshepsut and Nefertiti were trained in these arts. They understood that the human body, when consecrated and disciplined, became a living temple. Movement became prayer. Sexual energy, when treated as sacred, became a pathway to the divine. The Egyptians were not dreamers, they were realists who built wonders that defy time. They understood that power came in many forms, and feminine energy, when properly channeled, was among the most potent of all. To them, the erotic was not shameful, it was the spark that awakened consciousness, the bridge between the mortal and the eternal. As Anka Ceneamon dances, even the most seasoned priestesses begin to weep. They are not crying out of sorrow, but in awe, witnessing a mortal woman transformed into a vessel of divine authority. When dawn comes, she emerges from the temple radiant and changed, her movements infused with purpose. Later that day, when she addresses the royal court and proposes an alliance that will save Egypt from ruin, her words silence every skeptic. The power she summoned in that temple is now hers to command. This is the hidden truth of Egypt's sacred dancers, women who mastered the art of embodied power. Through discipline, devotion, and trance. Imagine a 6-year-old girl named Nebet, chosen from hundreds to enter the temple school at Dendra. Her selection wasn't based on beauty alone but on something more, an aura, an innate ability to slip into trance, a light in her presence that marked her as chosen. From her earliest years, Nebet studies hieroglyphs, anatomy, astronomy, and music. She learns to understand her body as a map of divine forces, her movements as the reflection of stars. By the age of 10, she begins her training in what priests called the language of the limbs, each gesture, each curve of her spine a precise invocation of gods. Her body becomes an instrument, tuned to frequencies of the cosmos. By 12, Nebet can enter trance states at will, embodying goddesses like Sekhmet and Hathor so vividly that even warriors step back in awe. When she moves, people feel peace or passion awaken within them, proof, to the ancients, that divine energy flowed through her. Generations later, another woman named Seneb would rise from the same sacred schools to become one of the most powerful figures in Egypt, a priestess whose influence reached from Nubia to Babylon. During a devastating drought, when the Nile failed and panic spread, Queen Hatshepsut called upon Seneb to perform a ritual unseen for 2 centuries, the dance of the returning waters. At dawn on the summer solstice, 7 dancers, each representing an aspect of Isis, performed the dance upon the island temple of Philae. The ritual was perilous. If even one movement faltered, it could spell political and spiritual disaster. As Seneb led the dance, witnesses claimed the air itself trembled, shadows moved of their own accord, and when she raised her arms to summon Osiris's resurrection, the sound of rushing water filled the horizon. The Nile began to rise. Coincidence or miracle, the flood returned that year, more abundant than any in living memory. Egypt prospered once again, and Seneb was revered as a living goddess. But instead of basking in glory, she used her influence to build something enduring, a network of women trained in the sacred arts who became Egypt's first informal diplomats and intelligence agents. These women traveled freely between empires, performing rituals that opened doors and softened hearts. They negotiated treaties, gathered secrets, and shaped history in ways no official record could capture. Through dance, they wielded the kind of influence that reshaped the ancient world. This is the forbidden history of Egypt's sacred dancers, women who turned devotion into diplomacy, movement into magic, and art into empire. Their stories remind us that true power has many faces, and sometimes, it moves to the rhythm of a drum. Beneath the golden sands of ancient Egypt, far from the noise of the markets and the eyes of the uninitiated, there existed hidden sanctuaries known only to the priesthood. These were the houses of Hathor, secret academies where chosen girls were transformed into living vessels of divine energy. Inside, silence was sacred, broken only by the rhythm of drums and the whisper of silk as bodies moved through ritual practice. The air inside these chambers was thick with incense, lotus, myrrh, and cedar, each fragrance believed to open a different layer of consciousness. Here, young initiates learned not just to dance, but to command energy itself. Their training blended philosophy, astronomy, anatomy, and emotion. Every movement had a meaning. Every glance was a form of prayer. Elders, known as the Mothers of Light, guided their students through years of discipline. The first lesson was always the same: stillness. Before you can move with divine grace, they would say, you must learn to be still enough for the gods to notice you. The girls would sit for hours in meditation before a burning lamp, staring into the flame until their thoughts dissolved. Then came the training of breath. Controlled inhalation and exhalation were believed to mirror the expansion and contraction of the universe, the inhale of creation, the exhale of destruction. Through this sacred breathing, the dancers learned to manipulate their own life force, awakening what Egyptian mystics called Ka, the vital essence. When they danced, it was this Ka that moved through them, transforming ordinary motion into a living invocation of divine presence. But the most mysterious part of their education was the initiation of the 7 veils, a secret rite symbolizing the 7 stages of enlightenment. Each veil represented one layer of illusion that separated the mortal world from the divine. To dance away these veils was not an act of seduction, it was an act of revelation, a stripping away of all falseness until only pure spirit remained. The ceremony was so secret that only the high priestesses and a handful of royals were permitted to witness it. It was said that when the final veil fell, even the statues of the gods seemed to tremble, as if acknowledging the dancers' union with divine essence. By the 14th century BCE, these sacred dancers had become far more than temple performers. They were advisors, emissaries, and mediators between the mortal and divine realms. In a world where men ruled by sword and decree, these women ruled through beauty, intelligence, and mystery. Many pharaohs sought their counsel, believing their insight came directly from the gods. It wasn't uncommon for a powerful priestess dancer to influence royal decisions, from trade alliances to military campaigns. Their voices echoed in chambers where no other woman's voice dared to speak. The Temple of Hathor in Dendra became a center of both spirituality and statecraft. Foreign ambassadors visiting Egypt often requested private audiences with the temple dancers, officially to witness their performances. In one recorded instance, during the reign of Thutmose III, a dancer named Mersang performed before visiting envoys from Mesopotamia. Hidden within her movements was a silent treaty, a series of gestures that conveyed Egypt's willingness to share access to sacred trade routes in exchange for peace. The envoys understood the message without a single word spoken. Days later, an agreement was signed, one that would ensure decades of prosperity. This was the brilliance of the dancing priestesses. They understood what modern diplomats often forget, that emotion is the language of influence. A single gesture, perfectly timed, could shift hearts faster than 1,000 speeches. The Egyptians believed that sound and motion were 2 halves of the same divine act. Every tone resonated with a specific frequency of the universe, and every movement mirrored the path of celestial bodies. Together, they formed the science of resonance, a spiritual technology so precise that modern researchers are still trying to decode its secrets. During sacred rituals, the dancers would align their steps to the rhythm of sistrums and drums, their bodies vibrating in harmony with chants that invoked the gods. It was said that when the rhythm and the breath of the dancers synchronized perfectly, the temple itself would seem to come alive, the air pulsing, the lamps flickering, the walls resonating with invisible power. Priests believed these rituals could heal sickness, bless harvests, and even influence the annual flooding of the Nile. To the ancient mind, the boundary between consciousness and nature was thin, and these women, through their art, were the keepers of that connection. But beyond their sacred duties, the dancers faced envy and suspicion. Their closeness to divine and royal power made them both revered and feared. Some courtiers accused them of witchcraft, others claimed they bewitched rulers with beauty and song. Yet none could deny the results. Whenever the sacred dancers performed, peace followed, crops flourished, and omens turned favorable. As the centuries passed and new empires rose, Egypt's golden age of sacred femininity began to fade. Foreign invaders, unable to comprehend the blend of sexuality and spirituality, outlawed many temple rituals. The priestesses were stripped of their titles, their dances branded as profane. The temples of Hathor fell silent. The once golden courtyards where women had danced for gods and kings were left to crumble under drifting sand. The great tradition of sacred dance, a language that once united the heavens and the earth, was nearly erased from history. And yet, traces remain. In the fragments of murals buried deep within tombs, we still see their movements captured in eternal poise, arms curved like the crescent moon, bodies balanced between grace and strength. The power they embodied has never truly vanished, it lingers like the faint perfume of lotus carried on the desert wind. Today, we can only imagine what it felt like to stand within those temples, to hear the rhythm of ancient drums echo through the pillars, to witness women who could turn faith into motion, power into prayer. They were not merely dancers. They were the heartbeat of a civilization, women who held in their bodies the memory of creation itself. So the next time you see a painting of an Egyptian woman swaying beneath a canopy of stars, remember this: she was not performing for pleasure. She was performing for the gods. Because for the women of the Nile, to dance was to summon the divine. The night air of ancient Thebes was thick with mystery. Moonlight shimmered across the Nile, painting silver trails on the dark water as the chants of unseen voices drifted from distant temples. Somewhere, deep beneath that same moon, the sacred sisters of Hathor gathered for what would be one of their last secret rituals. They came barefoot, wrapped in veils of white and gold, their faces marked with the sacred symbols of rebirth. Each carried a small bowl of oil and a single lotus flower, offerings for the goddess who had once ruled their hearts and destinies. The drums began softly, then grew louder, vibrating through the stone walls like the heartbeat of the earth. As they danced, their movements were not of sorrow, but defiance. Each gesture, a rebellion against oblivion. Each step, a vow that their art, their spirit, would not vanish with time. Even as the priests of new gods tore down their sanctuaries, these women danced, preserving their faith through motion, leaving behind vibrations that still hum beneath the desert sands. It is said that some of them fled into hidden oases, taking with them fragments of the old teachings, chants, symbols, and sacred gestures. Generations later, whispers of those dances reappeared in distant lands, in the court dances of Persia, the mystic whirls of the Middle East, and even the flowing movements of Mediterranean rituals. The spirit of the Nile's dancers never died. It evolved, surviving beneath different names, across distant shores. Thousands of years later, in the 19th century, when European explorers first set foot among the ruins of Dendera and Luxor, they were stunned. The walls spoke in images, paintings of women mid-dance, surrounded by musicians and priests, their arms raised in perfect geometric grace. To the archaeologists, these were merely decorative scenes. But to a few rare scholars, they were codified instructions. Each pose mirrored a constellation, each hand gesture aligned with a celestial event. Dr. Evelyn Moore, a British Egyptologist in the 1920s, wrote in her secret field notes. Her discovery was dismissed at the time, considered too mystical. Yet decades later, her theory resurfaced when archaeologists uncovered musical instruments engraved with mathematical notations, proof that sound, movement, and astronomy were indeed intertwined in ritual. The world began to realize that these women, the so-called dancing girls of the Nile, were not entertainers. They were scientists of spirit. Modern Egyptologists now believe that the cult of Hathor was one of the most complex spiritual systems in ancient history, a balance between love, beauty, fertility, and cosmic order. Hathor was called Mistress of the West, the one who greeted souls in the afterlife, and Lady of Jubilation, who inspired joy through dance and music. Her temples were more than houses of worship, they were centers of art, medicine, and psychology. The dancers, through their rituals, created what we might call energy therapy today, harmonizing the body and mind through rhythm and breath. When the Greeks arrived, they absorbed these mysteries into their own myths, merging Hathor with Aphrodite. The Romans did the same, renaming her Venus. The divine feminine was reborn again and again, but always carrying the same heart, the same rhythm of the Nile. In every culture that came after, the echoes of her ritual remained, in the way women moved, in the songs sung under moonlight, in the rhythm of the drum that still calls to something ancient inside us. In the deserts of modern Egypt, a new generation of women has begun to reclaim this lost legacy. Archaeologists, dancers, and historians now work together to reconstruct the ancient movements once thought lost forever. They study carvings, temple murals, and papyrus fragments, comparing symbols to musical scales and star charts. Step by step, the dance of the Nile is being reborn, not as entertainment, but as a sacred remembrance. One Egyptian dancer, Layla El Sayed, describes it this way. In performances across Cairo, Luxor, and Alexandria, the modern daughters of Hathor bring those forgotten rituals to life once more, graceful, powerful, and unapologetically divine. The same rhythm that once echoed through temple courtyards now vibrates through modern stages, a bridge across time, reminding us that art, when born from spirit, never truly dies. And so the legend endures. From the stone halls of Dendra to the digital screens of our age, the story of the Nile's sacred dancers continues to fascinate, to inspire, to awaken something deep and ancient in our collective memory. Perhaps it is because their dance was never about performance, it was about truth. A truth so pure that it transcended language, empire, and time. They taught humanity that the divine feminine is not a myth to be worshipped from afar, it is a force that lives within every heartbeat, every song, every motion of love and creation. The forbidden rituals of the Nile were never meant to vanish. They were meant to sleep, until the world was ready once again to understand them. Now, as we stand on the sands where it all began, under the same stars that once watched those sacred dances, we are reminded that what is divine cannot be erased, only forgotten. And perhaps, just perhaps, when the wind moves across the Nile on a silent night, you might still hear the faint echo of drums. The heartbeat of the goddess herself, dancing once more beneath the moon. As the centuries passed, the sands of time buried not just temples but entire legacies. Yet, beneath the dunes near Abydos, recent excavations revealed something astonishing, the remains of an underground chamber, its walls still painted with scenes of women dancing in a circle, surrounding a glowing orb drawn as the sun itself. Archaeologists described it as the chamber of resonance. When sound is made within it, a chant, a hum, even a heartbeat, the entire room vibrates like an instrument. Could this have been where the final ritual took place? Could the orb be a symbolic depiction of the soul's journey to divine light, or a literal record of an ancient energy practice? No one knows for certain. But what they do know is that the temple was built during the reign of Pharaoh Hatshepsut, a queen who ruled not through conquest, but through grace, art, and spiritual harmony. Perhaps she too was one of Hathor's chosen daughters, preserving the sacred dance of light through the darkest times of empire and transition. As explorers and collectors arrived in Egypt in the 19th century, many of these murals and relics were stolen, shipped to Europe, and locked away in private vaults. Some pieces disappeared altogether. Strangely, several of the men who had stolen artifacts from Dendra's temples recorded eerie experiences in their diaries. One French collector wrote, "He sold the relics soon after and fled Egypt, never to return. For generations, rumors of a dancer's curse haunted museum halls, whispers of moving shadows, faint music after closing hours, and sudden gusts of wind around certain statues. Historians dismissed them as superstition. But among Egypt's locals, the story lived on, that the spirit of the goddess still watches over her daughters, punishing those who treat their sacred art as mere treasure. Today, in the quiet town of Cana near Dendra, a new kind of pilgrimage has begun. Artists, dancers, historians, and spiritual seekers travel there not for gold or fame, but to reconnect with the divine rhythm of the Nile. Workshops are held in open courtyards under moonlight. Women and men from every corner of the world move in unison, reawakening the ancient gestures. The movements are slow, deliberate, and filled with reverence, each spin representing the cycle of life, each bow a surrender to the eternal river of creation. Dr. Noura Hassan, a modern Egyptologist and choreographer, says, "Decades after the discovery of the Chamber of Resonance, another revelation emerged in the Western Desert. A small excavation team uncovered fragments of papyrus sealed inside a clay jar. The text was barely legible, faded hieratic writing, fragments of prayers, and what appeared to be musical notes drawn alongside geometric figures. When decoded, the translation stunned scholars. It was the first written record directly linking the sacred dance to astronomy, proving that the rituals of the Nile were not mere entertainment but coded reflections of celestial knowledge. Every turn, every movement, represented a constellation, a planet, or the shifting of seasons. These women were not only dancers, they were living calendars, breathing embodiments of cosmic harmony. And yet, history had reduced them to myths, to nameless silhouettes painted on crumbling stone. When the European powers arrived in Egypt during the 18th and 19th centuries, they brought archaeologists, collectors, and prejudice. To the colonizers, the idea of women holding sacred or scientific power was unsettling. Thus began a subtle erasure. Temple carvings were reinterpreted as entertainment scenes. The dancers of the Nile were labeled as courtesans, their rituals described as spectacles for pleasure rather than devotion. Their true purpose, to heal, to invoke the divine, to balance the cosmos, was buried under the weight of Victorian morality and colonial arrogance. Historians now call it the second burial, not of their bodies, but of their truth. And yet, the goddess waited. Silent. Patient. Watching from the shadows of forgotten tombs. By the late 20th century, as feminism began to question the patriarchal lens of history, new scholars, many of them women, returned to Egypt's archives with fresh eyes. They re-examined the murals, the inscriptions, the music fragments, and found patterns the old scholars had missed. From belly dance to contemporary ritual performance, the heartbeat of Hathor still pulses. Each dance, each breath, each rising note of a drum, all carry the same ancient intention, to remind humanity of balance between creation and destruction, chaos and peace. In 2017, a group of sound archaeologists from Cairo University did something extraordinary. They digitally reconstructed the acoustic properties of the Dendra temple using laser mapping. When they played specific frequencies through the ancient hallways, something miraculous happened. The vibrations formed visible wave patterns, identical to the carvings etched on the walls centuries ago. It was as if the temple itself was a musical instrument, and the dancers had been tuning the universe. One of the researchers, in awe, whispered. The discovery reignited global interest. Musicologists began to recreate the Hymn of the Nile, a haunting melody of flutes, harps, and drums, echoing the mathematical symmetry of the stars. When the hymn was performed publicly for the first time, many in the audience wept without knowing why. Something ancient, buried deep in human memory, had stirred awake. And so, after centuries of silence, the goddess of dance, beauty, and cosmic rhythm returns, not as a myth, not as a statue in a museum, but as a living force in the hearts of those who remember. In Cairo's cultural festivals, in New York's performance art spaces, in the open deserts of Sinai, women and men now gather to honor her through motion, light, and sound. They do not call it worship. They call it remembrance. For the Nile is not just a river. It is a living archive, carrying stories from the dawn of civilization, whispering secrets of balance, harmony, and divine union. And every time a dancer raises her hands toward the moon, every time music echoes through stone and sand, the past and present meet, and the goddess smiles once again. In the beginning, there was rhythm, and in rhythm, there was life. The women of the Nile understood what the modern world has forgotten, that the dance of the body is the dance of the universe. They were not merely dancers. They were bridges, between heaven and earth, between silence and sound, between the mortal and the divine. And as the stars reflect upon the Nile, their light mingles with the memory of every sacred step ever taken. Listen closely, for if you are still enough, you may hear it, the song of the goddess. The eternal rhythm of life itself. Centuries after the last temple rituals faded into silence, a shadowy sisterhood known as the Order of the Hidden Veil emerged across the lands once ruled by Egypt. They were healers, midwives, astrologers, and yes, dancers, who passed fragments of sacred knowledge from mother to daughter, from teacher to apprentice, hidden beneath the rhythms of daily life. They no longer called upon Hathor or Isis by name. Instead, they whispered prayers to She who moves the moon. Their gestures looked like simple folk dances, performed at weddings and harvest festivals, but the truth was far deeper. Each movement concealed an ancient code, gestures that once aligned the soul with the turning of the heavens. These women survived conquest after conquest, Persian, Greek, Roman, Ottoman, adapting their art each time, wrapping their divine inheritance in layers of secrecy. To outsiders, they were entertainers. To initiates, they were living libraries of a lost civilization. When Egypt fell to Rome, temples were stripped of their treasures, scrolls burned, and priestesses enslaved or silenced. The rituals of the Nile became curiosities, distorted in foreign texts as exotic seductions, their spiritual meaning erased. And yet, even under Roman rule, echoes remained. Roman matrons hired Egyptian women to perform moon dances at private gatherings, unaware that these movements were once offerings to the divine feminine. Roman poets described these dances with fascination and fear, for something about them felt too real, too powerful. One writer described watching a performance in Alexandria. In 1924, during a British excavation near Thebes, archaeologists stumbled upon a sealed limestone chamber. Inside lay the mummified remains of a woman dressed not in royal linen, but in layers of crimson and gold silk, an attire no historian could classify. Around her were bronze mirrors, ivory combs, and a set of delicate golden anklets engraved with tiny hieroglyphs. When translated, they read. The archaeologists, unnerved by the inscription, nicknamed her the last priestess of the dance. But what truly startled them was the state of her body, perfectly preserved, with faint traces of perfume still clinging to the air. A chemical analysis decades later revealed the oil was made from blue lotus, a flower known in Egyptian lore to induce visions of the divine. It was as if even in death, she was still mid-dance, paused, waiting for the drumbeat of eternity to resume. Fast forward to the 21st century. Modern researchers using neuroimaging began to uncover something astonishing: rhythmic movement and music, when combined with focused intention, alter the brain's frequency patterns, inducing heightened states of awareness nearly identical to deep meditation. It seemed that what the ancient priestesses called divine communion might, in fact, have a scientific basis. Their ritual dances were not primitive superstition, they were ancient neurology, spiritual technology designed to synchronize body and consciousness. Every sway, every vibration of the drum, every turn of the wrist, each was a precise frequency meant to align human consciousness with the Earth's magnetic field. The priests built temples to amplify sound. The dancers used their bodies to translate it. Together, they turned the cosmos into choreography. But what happens when we look into the mirror of history and see our own reflection? Modern women across the world, from Cairo to Paris, New York to Karachi, have begun to rediscover these ancient movements. Not as religion, but as remembrance. They call it sacred embodiment, feminine awakening, or ancestral movement. They gather beneath the moon, barefoot, draped in fabrics that shimmer like water. The drum beats rise, and with every motion, they reclaim something taken from them centuries ago. They do not need temples or altars. The temple is their body. The altar is their breath. In those moments, time dissolves. Hathor lives again, not as a goddess of stone, but as an energy flowing through every dancer who dares to move with meaning. Among the fragments found in the tomb of the last priestess, scholars recently translated a line that had long been misunderstood. It reads, "For years it was dismissed as poetic metaphor. But in recent times, as humanity faces ecological collapse, social unrest, and spiritual disconnection, the prophecy feels hauntingly relevant. Maybe the return of the feminine arts isn't nostalgia. Maybe it's survival. Because to dance, to reconnect with the pulse of life, is to heal." And perhaps, in the movement of these modern women, the ancient Nile flows once more. As the story of the dancing girls of the Nile comes full circle, one truth remains unshaken. Power never truly disappears. It transforms, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. In every culture, in every era, the feminine principle finds a way to express itself, through art, through music, through the rhythm of the heart. And when humanity forgets, the goddess dances again. Because the dance was never just about beauty or desire. It was about connection, between heaven and earth, spirit and flesh, creation and decay. So as you listen now, under the same stars that once shone over Thebes and Dendra, remember. You are hearing echoes of a rhythm that has never stopped. As centuries rolled by, the echoes of those forbidden rituals began to fade, but the mystery surrounding them only grew deeper. Travelers, scholars, and explorers who ventured along the Nile would often speak in hushed tones of ancient temples where murals still depicted women mid-dance, arms curved gracefully, eyes lifted toward unseen gods. Their movements, frozen in stone, told a story of devotion, temptation, and power. Even after the fall of Egypt's dynasties, whispers of secret gatherings persisted. Some said that in remote villages near Luxor, descendants of those temple dancers carried fragments of the old rituals, not as worship, but as inherited memory. These women, cloaked in mystery, would perform under the moonlight, believing the rhythm of the drum could summon blessings or spirits from the afterlife. During the 19th century, when Western archaeologists began their frenzied search for Egypt's lost treasures, they were stunned to discover artifacts depicting these dancers. Golden anklets, ivory combs, and delicate veils were found buried beside royal tombs, suggesting that even in death, their presence was desired. Yet, few dared to admit that behind the allure of discovery lay a darker truth: these dancers were not mere entertainers. They were spiritual conduits, chosen to bridge the world of mortals and the divine. As the modern world advanced, Egypt's sands continued to guard their secrets. The rituals once performed in hidden temples became myths, stories told by old storytellers on the riverbanks, warning young women never to dance under a full moon near the ancient ruins. For it was said that those who did might awaken the spirits of the Nile's sacred dancers, forever bound to repeat their forbidden waltz between desire and damnation. Yet, even today, when the desert wind howls across the river at night, locals claim to hear the faint echo of drums and anklets. Some say it's only the breeze brushing through the reeds. And so, the legend of the Nile's forbidden dancers refuses to die. Every generation finds itself drawn back to the same question: who were these women really? Were they victims of a forgotten age, sacrificed for their beauty and obedience? Or were they powerful priestesses, keepers of a divine secret that time itself could not erase? Archaeologists still uncover fragments, clay tablets inscribed with hymns to Hathor, the goddess of love and music. Some of these verses describe dances so precise, so sacred, that only those chosen by the high priests could perform them. The rhythm, it was said, could open the gates to the spirit world, allowing gods to walk among men. That, perhaps, was the greatest fear, and the greatest temptation. For those who witnessed such rituals often spoke of lights shimmering above the dancers, and a strange perfume filling the air, as if heaven itself had descended upon the earth. But as centuries passed, these rites were branded sinful, condemned by rulers who feared their seductive power. Temples were sealed, dancers exiled, their names erased from history. Yet destruction could not erase memory. In secret, the dance survived, passed down through whispers, gestures, and stories told in the dark. Mothers taught daughters the movements, not as worship, but as remembrance, a living rebellion against the silence imposed upon them. Even today, along the banks of the Nile, if you visit the remote villages untouched by modern life, you may find echoes of that legacy. During festivals or moonlit gatherings, women still dance, their hips swaying in ancient rhythm, their feet tracing the same steps carved into the temple walls thousands of years ago. They may not know the full meaning of the ritual, but the river remembers. The desert remembers. And the wind carries the pulse of that forbidden rhythm through the night. It's said that those who listen closely, standing by the water's edge at midnight, can hear a soft song. And as the world around Egypt changed, empires rose, conquerors came and went, the Nile flowed on, indifferent yet eternal. Its waters had seen kingdoms crumble, its depths had swallowed both tyrants and treasures. But the one thing that never faded was the myth of those dancing girls. In the early 20th century, when British explorers and Egyptian archaeologists began documenting the ruins of forgotten temples near Aswan and Thebes, strange reports surfaced. Local workers refused to dig at night. They claimed to see faint silhouettes of women shimmering over the sand, their veils glowing softly in the moonlight, moving in perfect unison to music no one could hear. Some thought it was an illusion caused by heat and exhaustion. Others swore it was the spirits of the dancers guarding the secrets buried beneath the temple floors. One journal entry from 1923 described an archaeologist who heard the sound of anklets echoing in an empty chamber. He wrote that the air had suddenly turned cold, and a scent of lotus flowers filled the tomb. The next morning, he left the site and never returned. His final note simply read, "They are still dancing." Over the decades, historians have debated the true purpose of the rituals. Were they offerings to the gods, pleas for fertility, or ceremonies of resurrection? Some modern scholars believe the dance was a coded language, each movement representing the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Others suggest it was a form of forbidden empowerment, women channeling divine energy in a world ruled by men. But the truth may lie somewhere in between. The dancing girls of the Nile were neither sinners nor saints, they were bridges between worlds. Through their movement, they carried the prayers of mortals to the heavens and brought down the blessings of gods to the earth. Their rhythm was the heartbeat of Egypt itself, sensual, sacred, and eternal. Even today, their legacy lingers quietly in Egyptian culture. The modern art of belly dance, admired across the world, is believed to have inherited fragments of their ancient choreography, the same undulating gestures that once summoned spirits and celebrated the sacred feminine. Yet, the original purpose of that dance has been lost to time, buried beneath layers of sand and silence. Still, some believe the Nile remembers. On quiet nights, when the river reflects the full moon, its waters seem to ripple to an unseen rhythm, as if something ancient still moves beneath the surface. Perhaps the forbidden ritual never truly ended. Perhaps it only waits, for those who dare to listen. As the night deepens over the vast Egyptian desert, the Nile gleams like a serpent of silver under the full moon. The wind hums softly through the papyrus reeds, carrying with it faint echoes, whispers, sighs, and a rhythm that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The camera glides slowly across the ancient landscape, ruins half buried in sand, crumbling columns etched with the faces of forgotten goddesses. Their eyes, carved in stone, seem to follow the flow of the river. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat rises, slow, steady, ancient. The sound is faint, but unmistakable. It is said that on nights like this, when the moon reaches its highest point, the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. The air begins to shimmer above the water. Mist curls like smoke. And there, in the reflection of the moon, shapes begin to form. They are women draped in translucent silks, their hair glistening like the river itself. Barefoot, adorned with golden anklets, they begin to move in unison, each step perfectly timed with the heartbeat of the earth. Their dance is not one of seduction, but of sorrow, a sacred lament for a world that has forgotten them. The sound of their bracelets merges with the flow of the Nile, their bodies swaying to the rhythm of eternity. For a brief, breathtaking moment, time itself seems to bend. The ruins glow softly, as if illuminated from within. Faces of ancient gods flicker across the stone, Isis, Hathor, Batet, watching, remembering. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the dancers fade into mist, their final gesture reaching toward the moon. Only silence remains, and the gentle murmur of the river. As dawn approaches, the first light of day kisses the water, washing away the night's magic. Fishermen setting out at sunrise glance across the calm surface and wonder why the air feels charged with something unspoken. They shrug it off, yet deep down, they sense they are not alone. Because legends never truly die. They sleep, waiting for hearts brave enough to believe again. The forbidden rituals may have vanished from history, but their essence lingers in every ripple of the Nile, in every song sung by the wind, and in every dancer who moves without knowing why her steps feel ancient. The Nile keeps its secrets well, but it never forgets. Beneath its tranquil surface, the spirit of the dancing girls lives on, eternal, unseen, and forever waiting for the moon to rise once more. And as the centuries fade into memory, the Nile continues its eternal journey, winding through the heart of Egypt like a living thread that binds past and present. Along its banks, cities have risen and fallen, civilizations have bloomed and turned to dust, yet the river still murmurs with the voices of the ancients. Those who pause to listen closely can almost hear it, a lullaby from another age, a melody carried by the wind, speaking of devotion, desire, and divine mystery. In Cairo's museums, behind glass and light, lie the remnants of that lost world, golden bracelets still gleaming after thousands of years, anklets with tiny bells that once chimed to the rhythm of sacred drums. Tourists stare in awe, never realizing that the metal once touched living skin. Some say that Egypt's modern dancers, those who perform on festival nights and weddings, are unknowingly echoing the same ancient movements. Their hips trace the same arcs, their arms extend in gestures older than any recorded language. Perhaps that is how the legacy endures, not through scripture or monuments, but through the body itself, remembering what the soul cannot forget. As night falls once more, and the moon climbs high over the desert, a soft mist rises from the river's surface. The stars shimmer like scattered gold dust across the heavens, and the water glows faintly, as though illuminated from within. A faint sound, the chiming of invisible anklets, ripples through the silence. Somewhere, unseen, the dancers of the Nile awaken again. Their laughter mingles with the wind, their steps echo softly across the sand. They are neither ghosts nor mortals, but something eternal, symbols of life's endless rhythm, of creation, loss, and rebirth. Their dance is a prayer written in motion, an offering to the gods who once ruled the skies, and a reminder to humankind that beauty and mystery are never truly lost, only transformed. The Nile, timeless and patient, bears witness to it all. It has seen kings rise, empires crumble, and still it flows, carrying secrets in its depths, reflecting both the heavens above and the shadows below. And when its waters shimmer beneath the full moon, those who stand in silence might catch a glimpse, a fleeting vision of veils, gold, and grace, and wonder if perhaps, for a heartbeat, the forbidden rituals of the dancing girls have returned once again. And so, as the camera drifts once more over the dark waters of the Nile, the world seems to fall still. The stars hang low, their reflections trembling on the river's surface like liquid fire. In the distance, a temple stands half buried in sand, its columns cracked, its gods long forgotten, yet something in the air feels alive. The faint whisper of silk. The scene lingers on a single drop of water falling into the river, spreading ripples outward, circles within circles, like the endless rhythm of a dance. The ripples fade, but the water glows faintly, as if something ancient stirs beneath its surface. Then, a glimpse. Just for a moment. A figure in white moves across the sand. Her eyes are lined with kohl, her arms lifted toward the moon. She turns, the golden anklets around her feet catching the moonlight, and as she spins, the air fills with invisible music. Her lips part as though whispering a name no one has spoken in thousands of years. The wind rises, sweeping across the dunes, carrying dust and memory alike. The figure dissolves into the night, leaving behind only the faint chime of bells. The river flows on. The narrator returns, voice low and haunting. A slow fade to the horizon, dawn breaking over the Nile. The first light of morning spills across the water, golden and eternal. The temples shimmer in the distance, their shadows retreating as the sun ascends. And as the final frame settles on the river, ancient, eternal, and alive, the words appear across the screen. The Nile keeps its secrets, but it never forgets. The light of dawn spreads slowly across the ancient valley, touching the stones of forgotten temples and breathing life into the carvings that have watched over millennia. The Nile glimmers gold beneath the rising sun, its calm surface reflecting the rebirth of another day, another century in its endless story. The whispers of the night fade, but they do not vanish. They sink deep into the river's depths, waiting patiently, as they always have. Villagers begin to stir along the banks. The air fills with the sounds of life, distant calls, the creak of wooden boats, the rustle of palm leaves in the morning breeze. Yet amidst the noise, the land itself feels heavy with memory. Beneath the soil, beneath every grain of sand, lies a pulse that beats in rhythm with the Nile. A pulse that beats in rhythm with the Nile. A pulse that carries stories, of devotion and desire, of worship and rebellion, of women who once defied the silence of gods and men alike. The narrator's voice returns, soft, reflective, almost like a prayer. The camera moves through time, from the gleaming temples of the past to the bustling Cairo of today. The call to prayer drifts through the streets, mixing with the sounds of modern life, horns, footsteps, laughter. Yet somewhere, between the noise and motion, a lone dancer begins her routine. Her feet move gracefully, her body swaying in perfect balance. The same rhythm that once moved the daughters of the Nile now beats quietly in her heart. She does not know the ancient words or the sacred steps, yet her movements awaken something timeless. The same current that carried those forbidden rituals still flows through her, invisible, eternal. The music swells, and as she twirls beneath the same unchanging moon that once shone on the temples of Luxor, her shadow merges with those who came before her. The past and present become one. Scene opens with a sweeping aerial shot of the Nile at sunset. The golden water flows calmly, reflecting the deep orange sky. The ancient river looks eternal, ageless, unbroken. The camera drifts over ruins swallowed by sand, where once temples stood alive with chants, music, and movement. The narrator's voice enters, slow, soft, and reverent. Cut to a modern-day archaeologist kneeling in the dust near Luxor. She brushes away layers of sand and reveals a small bronze anklet, delicate, ancient, glimmering faintly in the dying light. As she lifts it carefully, the faint sound of anklets jingling begins to echo in the background, almost like ghosts awakening. The wind rises, carrying whispers, fragments of ancient hymns. The camera slowly rotates, showing faint images of women in flowing linen, dancers of the past, appearing as shimmering silhouettes among the ruins. They move in slow,